Greetings, class. I hope you guys are doing well. This week we're going through 1/3 of Henry David Thoreau's Walden. And Thoreau was a transcendentalist. What that means is he and Emerson created this philosophy that you have to get in nature. You have to get away from society. You have to go be in nature to truly understand yourself. To really understand who you are, you need to get away. And this book is about his experience at Walden Pond. He basically lived there for a year, and he recorded everything. He tried to be self-sufficient. He tried to be on his own in nature. And this book has inspired a lot of people. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Into the Wild, but about a guy who basically gives up his job, quits school, and just hits the road and ends up dying in Alaska. But he quoted this book a lot. He quoted Henry David Thoreau a lot. And if we start on page 46, 47, Henry David Thoreau is basically saying we become slaves to our lives. We don't have slave drivers, we become the slaves. He does say some people have a great proportion of the culture in his time had slaves, and he was fighting against that, as we've seen in civil disobedience. But he also said that we enslave ourselves to our jobs, we enslave ourselves to our society, and money. We're driven by money rather than doing the things we love and we enjoy. If we look at page 50, one of the most famous quotes in the entire book is on page 50. It's about the second paragraph. He says, "Mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." And it goes back to what we were saying earlier. People have dreams, they have ambitions, they want to be actors, they want to go to law school, they want to travel the world. And life happens and they never get to do those things, but they still have this desire to do it. So their lives are not being fulfilled, they're not fulfilling their dreams. And because of that, they're hurting inside. And so he remarks that quite a bit in this book. And he also is basically saying that experiences are greater teachers than wisdom. You have to get out there, you have to experience life, you have to put yourself into the throes of nature. He talks a lot about money. He says that, and it's interesting because he was writing this in the 1800s, but he was talking a lot about consumerism. Down at the bottom of page 56, he says most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only indispensable, but positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind. So he's saying most of the things that we're buying, they're not really helping our soul, they're not really helping our spirit. They're just holding us back. Now, I think that's a pretty profound quote that he says. Let's see. I have all the pages marked in my book. And also on page 72, he has a couple passages about this. He says at the top of 72, he says, "Many a man is harassed to death for paying the rent of a larger, more luxurious box who would not have frozen to death in such a box as this." He says, "I am far from jesting," but he says, "A comfortable house for a rude and hardy race that lived mostly outdoors was once made here entirely of such materials of nature." Let me explain what he's saying here. He's saying we spend a lot of money for houses, and we never get to enjoy the houses that we build, the houses that we live in, because we're too busy working to really experience it. And the only time we get to experience is when we retire, or when we're on our deathbed, that we can look back and say, wow, I actually have a nice place. He's being a bit sarcastic here, but he is saying we spend a lot of times paying for things, paying for our place in society, but we don't enjoy them. And he says that we spend so much money in his time building these houses, but why are we spending so much money on materials that come from the earth? We could save a lot of money just by building our own houses and being self-sufficient, which in 2022 would be a lot more expensive and harder with laws and mandates towards building houses. But I do like his point that we spend so much time paying rent, paying mortgages, working and working and working, and then never really enjoying the things that we have. And that's an echoed point that he has throughout this entire book. I'm reading he says this on page 135. It kind of resonates with what we just said. He says, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discovered I had not lived. So he wanted to experience himself, he wanted to experience nature, he wanted to get there and just live day to day, moment to moment, rather than thinking about retirement or thinking about work. He just wanted to be and exist. Another thing he says on page 134, he says, moral reform is the effort to throw off sleep. And he's basically, if you look at a lot of what he's saying in this passage, in these few passages, he's saying that we spend so much time working, taking care of children, that we don't really take time to take care of ourselves, nurture our souls, nurture our minds. And so we're suffering because of it. Humankind is suffering because of it. There's a lot of other things, like on page 137, he kind of reiterates it. In the second paragraph, he says, why should we live with such hurry and waste of life? We spend so much time rushing, driving on freeways to work, to see friends, to manage all of these activities. But we're kind of wasting our lives because we're not listening to ourselves. We're listening to our culture, we're listening to our friends, we're listening to society, when ideally we should be listening to ourselves. And then, let's see. I want to get into the next section. Give me a moment. I'm losing my bookmarks. Like I said, it'd be so much easier to lecture than have to mark my books. I'm doing the best I can right now. Okay. I'm going to move forward to page 112, where he says, for more than 5 years, I maintained myself thus by the labor of my hands, and I found that by working about 6 weeks a year, I could meet all the expenses of living. The whole of my winters, as well as most of my summers, I had free and clear for study. I have thoroughly tried school keeping and found that my expenses were in proportion, rather out of proportion, to my income, for I was obliged to dress and train, not to say, think, and believe accordingly, and I lost my time into the bargain. So he's saying, out here in this life, I mean, he was selling goods. He was growing vegetables and things like that and selling at the market. And he's like, I could earn enough in 6 weeks here if I just make my own clothes, if I just grow my own food, that I can make enough in 6 weeks and have the rest of the year to study and live life how I want to. And he's saying, when I was a school teacher, I didn't have this time, and I was relying so much on providers around me to provide my clothes, to provide my house, and things like this, that I really didn't have time to enjoy my life, and I didn't have time to think and believe. And the last passage I look at for this week is the last passage is, just give me 1 second. Oh, I really like some of his nature passages. I mean, the book is known for getting back in nature. And he has some nice play on words, and if you really delve into these chapters, he's talking a lot about just enjoying nature, enjoying the morning, just be out there. He's saying don't be out there. When people go into nature, he says that we just complain about mosquitoes, we complain about bug bites and noise and dirtiness, but he's saying we really got to get past that and just observe it and appreciate it. And I really like this quote that's an observance of nature. It's at the very bottom. He says, an abode without birds is like meat without seasoning. Such was not my abode, for I found myself suddenly neighbor to the birds, not by having imprisoned one, but by having caged myself near them. That's a beautiful passage, because he's saying most of us prison birds, we put them in cages and we appreciate them there. But he built his house, he built his prison, and he let the birds observe him. That's a really nice passage, and he has several like this in this book. So some of the takeaways from this lesson are Henry David Thoreau, his whole point is that society, if we're going back to our theme of conformity, he's saying that society is making us conform, it's making us become people we don't want to be. It's making us unhappy. It's making us slaves to our jobs, we're being dictated. Our life is being dictated by others, and we're not living and being our true selves. And what he's saying is we have to get into nature. We have to get away from everything to really see who we are and to appreciate ourselves. And so that's the core of what he's saying. And there's a lot of other great passages in this book. I hope you guys understand it and appreciate it. And if you guys have any other questions on this book, please feel free to email me. Next week we'll cover the next third of this book, and then we'll finish the book the following week. So thank you guys for listening.